of you here have an interest in this, otherwise you would be here. But these topics they have some link, but they are not too closely linked with each other necessarily. And maybe we have a quick check before we start who is more interested in the landscape modeling and who's more interested in the results. But before we do that, perhaps we briefly introduce ourselves so that you know who is Diego.
Okay, so my name is Diego Becan. I am a wheat crop modeler working for CIMIT. I'm based here in Mexico, and I do crop modeling application in large scale simulations. So mostly work around topics like climate change, some work that we can apply some aspects of like crop losses, disease, this assessment in terms of damage, and terms of susceptibility areas in the world, so we can map where we can take a look on what are the vulnerable regions and requires more attention for policy decisions. Also, working with the agronomists to optimize agronomic traits of sowing dates and varieties to different environments. What else? And also work with the breeders. Yes, it was well.
Okay. My name is Frank Ebert. I'm from the Leibniz Center of Agricultural Landscape Research. So the landscape is in the title of the center. And as the name of the institute indicates, we're dealing with landscape-related issues. I'm also professor of crop science at the University of Bonn. My background is in crop physiology, crop modeling, but I have also moved into integrated modeling and now more prominently to the landscape level. I don't think we make a round of introduction because we are too many here, but maybe if you start saying something, you could just briefly say your name and your institution so that we have some indication where you're from. As I already said, landscape scale modeling and crop losses can be quite different, although there is some link. Maybe we first to understand the interest of the group here. I think we have never met in this context. Who is interested primarily in landscape scale modeling? Okay. You can also raise your hand twice. And then, of course, in crop loss aspects. Okay. So we are quite evenly distributed. That's good to see that. We were given some guiding. Perhaps we can turn that off. I think it needs to be on the screen. Oh, well done. That's nice to see. Some guiding questions. Identify existing AgMIP and related activities in this area and what are the most relevant advances. Since we didn't know you, we didn't know who would come. It would be good at the end of the session if we have some understanding of who is working on these topics, who is working on specific parts on these topics, and what are your interests in this. If we have that understanding, I think we can further sort of develop ideas, perhaps also with respect to forming a group, forming an activity around these topics so that we can carry that further into the future if there's a shared interest. I guess that would be good if you get that out and also see links to other activities, etc. We think there are links, we think there is a demand, but of course it's a shared understanding that we would basically need in order to pursue. So how do we go about this now? Yeah, is anybody willing to take notes? We have to give a little report.
We can take notes.
You take notes? Oh, great. That's good. Yeah, we take notes and for a little report. Who has actually done some landscape scale modeling? We heard in the plenary of the importance of land as a commodity. And who has been involved in landscape scale modeling, is actively involved in that?
You define that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's its the scale?
Being all deserts or
It's a
just
plot, it's
regional?
maybe I
Yeah.
this. Maybe I first get a sense again, and then we come to this term landscape. Who has been involved in landscape scale modeling? Landscape. Okay, so that's quite a number of people. Good. I have presented a few slides, not so much with the definition, but there is at least an indication of what the landscape is in the way we understand it. So if you talk about innovation changes, how we've had the discussion about technology, or we will have also a plenary session later on, where we have the crop level, we have the production farming system level, and then we have the landscape level. It can also be the regional level, but it's usually a geographic space that has some common features through which it can then be described. So it's larger than the production system and the farm, depends on how big the farms are, but in most cases, a landscape is composed of several farms. And it's certainly, in most cases, smaller than the national level. Somewhere it would be the sub level. We've done some, to scroll through this, some delineation of trying to define that. That's unfortunately in German, and I'm not reading this out to you, but I translate the first three items. It can be defined, the landscape, by the size of the area you're looking at, but it can also be defined by the borders. There may be natural borders of certain biomes, what you have in the landscape. There can also be anthropogenic borders, so administrative boundaries. That makes it already complex. So when you want to model it, what is more important? And these do not necessarily match. So there's a mismatch of the natural borders and the anthropogenic borders. And there can also be a perspective from the actors that are active in a certain basin. So the landscape has not only a natural dimension, also has a socio-cultural dimension quite often. And those sort of three perspectives are not very clearly defined in order to arrive at one definition of a landscape. It always has the element of what is your perspective. That is just a quick intro to that landscape term. Yeah. And perhaps I'm not going into the details. I was about to show, I wasn't sure where you are, but I was about to show some understanding that we have at the institute where I work, but I maybe spare this and we use the time in order to hear from you what you are doing in that domain and what your interests are in terms of linking up, in terms of developing further. And we take a quick stop of where people are, and then we see what we have here, and where there are gaps, where there's an interest to converge, etc. Get a clearer picture. And then further on throughout that workshop, we also look a bit more into crop loss. That could be a way to go. If that's okay for you, yeah. So let me go back to the modeling activities. Right? Several of you raised your hands, and maybe you can be a bit more specific of what you are actually doing at that landscape level. Who wants to make a start, please?
I'm Chris Colbert from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Austria, and we run a global gridded crop model, typically at a 10-kilometer resolution, but we also work at continental and regional scales. And for us, this landscape scale is, for example, working in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, where we then simulate multiple cropping systems, which we can typically not do globally so far, so we can work with more detail at those local scales. And now we are increasingly also interested in these interactions, for example, biotic interactions with pollinators. So there we want to see how can we couple our process-based crop model, either online or offline, with other models, like we saw already also in the presentation with diseases today in the morning, but can also be beneficial biotic interactions.
Yes, that's I think that's a very good start, because it picks on a specific characteristics of the landscape level, where you look at other aspects than just crop. Right? If you come from a cropping system domain on crop productivity and aspects related to that, Yeah, you have pollinators, you have biodiversity, ecosystem related variables that come into the place, so it becomes much more much broader and of course much more challenging in order to understand those interactions and consider them into the learning approaches. Yeah, very good to hear that. Who wants to continue? Yes.
Hi, Jack Gordon, University College London. So I work with Marco Springman, looking at how kind of food systems feed back with biodiversity. So we look at kind of consumption, sustainable diets, and we try and track that back through production, understand how they affect biodiversity services and how in turn that goes back to affect food systems. So kind of experimenting with a lot of different modeling workflows at the moment. And yeah, really interested to kind of keep hearing kind of biodiversity being mentioned at AgMIP, because I think it's a big area that needs a lot of research and a lot of further look into. Agroecology, agroforestry, all these kind of exciting things kind of emerging.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Who is not familiar with the term ecosystem services? Very good. And I can spare that slide. Who wants to continue? Yeah.
My name is Lennart Jansen. I work at PIC and University of Kassel. We use a custom implementation of the AgMIP model on a gridded basis. And landscape scale, we've done an analysis of climate change impacts in the Sahel region and the Niger Basin. And personally, I'm interested in modeling adaptation in dependence of climate change, as well as attribution of climate change impacts currently, not just in the future.
Why the landscape level?
Because AgMIP is a point scale model, of course, and not really useful if you want to make a statement on climate change impacts in, let's say, the Sahel region. And so we had to expand it a lot to
Spatialized.
yeah.
Okay. But you still focus on the crop mainly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And try to now use land use models to somehow design counterfactual scenarios of adaptation and crop switching. But that's beginning stages.
Perhaps one question back, because I didn't note your model that you're using. Maybe you can just.
Yeah, so we currently, Marco's kind of, Marco and some other members of our team are developing kind of a model with bilateral trade feedback to understand where dietary shifts then kind of track into land production. And then we're looking at ways of kind of downscaling those estimates using something like SEALS, which I think is coming out of the investment Minnesota at the moment, which kind of downscales these sub-regional estimates of different land cover types into 100-meter resolution kind of patterning. And then putting that in with some of these kind of ecosystem service metrics and biodiversity metrics, like the ones that come out the best, and so trying to understand how they can then track back into food systems through that.
And that's a dynamic.
Okay.
Okay.
That's the plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Zali Chen, and now I'm working in the Leibniz Center of Agricultural Landscape Institution in Germany. But previously, I was working in Wageningen University, working with Julian Lutz with the landscape images model, which is a multi-objective optimization model in the landscape to optimize the landscape patterns in terms of compositions and configurations. What I did is that I have 2 case study landscapes in North China Plain, and we want to make the landscape towards more diversification of cropping systems, also semi-natural habitats. So the model can allocate the crop systems in the fields, also the flower strips on the field borders. Then we are looking at the different ecosystem services performance and to have a better landscapes with more sustainability. And the model can also design for different preference of stakeholders. For example, I'm looking at the production preference of stakeholders and the environmental preference of stakeholders, and to see how the different preference influence the landscape patterns. Yeah, my main challenge is that this model is static. We take the data from screenshots. I want to make it more dynamic and to see how would the landscape will be resilient under the climate scenarios. Another challenge is that now I'm looking at the biological control also in a very static and proxy way, and maybe I also want to make this process more dynamic and to say how to allocate the flower strips and interacted with the pest and biological movement in the landscape.
Thank you very much. I drew up this slide because you used the term configuration composition. It maybe not everybody is familiar to that. That's a typical way of sort of putting that into image when you change the sort of the diversity of a landscape with respect to the number of crops are grown, but also with respect to the arrangement of the crops and also the use or introduction of natural habitats in that, and to understand what that diversity makes in terms of the effects on ecosystem services, on biodiversity, and feedback mechanisms on the crops again is, I guess, something what you were referring to. Okay, so we go on. Thank you. Next one.
I thought I might just introduce maybe a different sort of perspective on this. So I'm Andrew Smith. I'm from Australia, and I did my PhD actually on landscapes and those interactions. But I work a lot now on farm systems, and I'm a bit disappointed in the AgMIP program that there's nothing on farming systems. But when we talk about farms in Australia, we're talking about 1,000 to 3,000 hectares, a bit like in Brazil. And where it's not only important to have a model that works on a spatial unit, but also the interaction between those. So whether it might be through the transfer of nutrients or dry matter in when we're considering livestock. So just generating crop models on a grid is we're interested in also the interaction between those spatial units, whether it be in terms of water. We don't do that at the moment, but that's an important aspect in terms of water quality and other aspects that you spoke about, landscape surfaces. And so, I just thought I'd introduce that at the moment for a different perspective.
Yeah, that's pretty cool that you bring in the farming system dimension to it. But then you gave the examples back to the crops. With respect to the farming systems, are you also looking at interactions among farmers in a region? Are you taking
No,
that
we're
into
not. I am not, but there are people doing that, but no.
Yeah. Okay. But the farming system comes into your picture because it organizes the crops in a landscape context. The farmers do that.
Yes.
Depending on
So
economic constraints,
farm according to soil type, which is determined by landscape in many cases. And but there's also because we have rotations, livestock also then need to move around. Certainly there will be different rotations in different parts of the landscape, etc. So
cool.
it's about heterogeneity, like you were saying.
Anthony Whitworth from Illyri. Illyri works a lot on pasture systems in Africa, Asia, mostly. And these are often vast rangeland systems. For me, a major deficiency in our modeling capabilities is to represent pastoral systems, rangeland systems, and the sustainability of rangeland systems. And this means we have to model the grasslands and the shrublands plus the livestock components. I'd really like AgMIP to start considering landscape, but rangeland systems have to be part of that kind of conversation with Christine.
And what's so important in that context with respect to the landscape level? I mean, you could do that point-based, perhaps farming system-based by landscape. I'm challenging you a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's really important question because these are often the pastoral communities are moving animals through a landscape. But that's the key thing. So you need to model the different aspects of the biophysical system, plus probably human side of it as well.
Seasonality.
Gastien Falconier from CERAD. We look at ecosystem disservices. Sorry to bring a concept, but this idea of wildlife creating crop losses in the environment. So we're trying to look at different types of wildlife, from twigger fauna to insects, and trying to look at how landscape composition and configuration will impact the occurrence of damages and whether you could engineer the landscapes so that to mitigate these damages. We have one case study in Southern Africa. It's Zimbabwe, where you have a conservation area with iconic megafauna creating damage on the crop. Also, all sorts of insects, fall armyworm damage on the maize. So we're trying to understand how does the landscape will impact these services.
And are you also working with models?
So here what we've been doing so far is using machine learning. We try and predict the occurrence based on landscape metrics. And then eventually this could be fed into some crop modeling at landscape level where the landscape influences some crop losses that on what you would simulate with your crop model. Yeah. That's a good prospect.
Yeah. I guess for several of us. Yeah. So my name is Santiago. I work at AgMIP in Brazil. And we have been working with some projects. One example, one project that we work at Cerrado scale that's produced half of the grains in Brazil. It was to simulating the potential yield to try to see the trade-offs between the risks in regions where, for instance, deforestation, try to avoid the risks and optimize yield. And for me, for us, at least in Brazil, it's easy to do at that scale, even though it's thousands of points. But I agree with you then. When you come back to the scale at the farm level, then it's much more difficult. So I would like to, maybe possible, the way that I think, was like could go in both ways. We could go in the scale and come back in the scale of the farm, eventually at the plot inside the farm. That's the unity that the farms do. So it would be very nice. And for instance, we will have the same problem in Brazil. We divide the degradation between the soil physical degradation that you can see for satellite, for instance, but the biological degradation from this perspective of the farm, that it's the loss of the forage that they're interesting, it's much more difficult to see. So, and this scale is very important for us because at least I talk about in Brazil. It's easy to work with banks in Brazil, central bank, and many cooperatives or insurance companies. They use the products that we do. But the farmers, it's a very almost never using the products that we are developing. So I think it's more difficult to the farm to adopt, to use these systems because they are not good in predicting at scale level. Predicting what the effect of a specific farm in Brazil.
And are you using models for the new work?
much impact for, again, at that county level.
Okay. Krishna, yeah, Krishna.
Myself, Krishna Devkota. I am scientist in Vigara. Vigara is International Center for Agriculture Research and Training. I'm based in Morocco. Yeah, this is good question. And actually, I did this kind of simulation in Uzbekistan very recently for wheat. Then another, of course, in Nepal, and then third one we did in Morocco, and very recently we did similar work in UAE. Maybe I'll give one example, and then I will tell what are my challenges. In UAE, we had one project. Actually, that was from the ADAPSA, that is Agriculture Food Safety and Security, that is national system in Abu Dhabi. And then for that project, we had to simulate 51 crops. They identified the crops, and we had to provide those suitability of those crops in dry land condition under 182 farms, and then under 3 production systems: open field condition, greenhouse with glass, and shade house with net house. And actually, it's very difficult to get model. Number one, getting appropriate model is very difficult, and we struggle a lot. And in the beginning, we tried with EPSIM, and EPSIM took, for one crop, it took 6 months, and that project was less than 1 year or two, very time limited, a lot of work. Then, point now is getting appropriate model is, of course, the difficult. And after we finished that project anyway, there were many different, I have a presentation on Thursday. I'll be showing the summary of those activities. My challenge, my question for this kind of landscape simulation is either we do EPSIM or DSAT. My career, I did mainly EPSIM, DSAT, and then Lindol also, and then sometimes Hydros as well. But mostly problem is most of them which I'm using is point based. Like when we did work in Ghana for the simulate measure potency, we had to make half by half, and we still spend a lot of time. It is laborious. We did, but it's laborious. Second, my challenge is laborious. So my third point is getting data. For example, landscape. What are the data set we are using? Ultimately, is ISRIC soil data. Many people are using that one. And what's the climate data? Many of them are using NASA power data. What's the accuracy of those data? NASA is now fortunately half degree by half degree. ISRIC is 250 by 250. And many times we simulate even in the non-crop areas, it's a lot of challenges. So my second or third challenge when we do this kind of landscape level simulation is getting data, soil data and climate data. Both are very challenging. And I download one data sometimes here, and then I download another. And then if we compare the data, it is same, because this is same pixel. And many times I have several papers, even myself, other when we review, people don't pay those kind of attention. So that's the thing. So that my funny data set, climate, of course, soil, of course, and fourth challenge is also the crop management practices as well. For example, I said I simulated 51 crop, but at the end we use mostly eco crop because this is less data demanding compared to EPSIM and DSAT. So we need this kind of so point here is data.
So you
crop
have
management
data issue.
Fortunately, POW had eco crop, or they developed some sort of tool, and we use that one to identify the planting data, etc. So this is data as well, again around the data. And my work, most of my work is around G by E by M, genotype by environment by management practices. And then we explore what is the planting rate, what variety, fertilizer rate, etc., different crops. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a hand, okay, online. I'm not sure where are our supporters, technical supporters. We are in demand of help.
You can just talk.
Can you just try to talk as John Porter?
Yes, it is, Frank. Yes. How are you?
Yeah. Hello, John. Good to see
Hello.
you. Yeah.
Yes, no, it works very well, actually. I mean, it's very interesting to hear this.
Yeah.
And nice to hear from you, Frank. It's been a while.
Yes.
But
sure.
yeah, and thank you for I got into this. I'm not an AI creation. Let me just say this to begin with. No, I'm here sitting in Denmark, and I'm interested in this. One of the things that I just wanted to make just a general point about is that, and I've just spent the afternoon talking to Lennart Olsen, who's at the University of Lund in Sweden. And Lennart has actually just got a big project from the European Research Council. This is a very highly prestigious support from the European Research Council. And what he's got a program about is about perenniality. And I think this is very relevant to, you've got the thing about existing AgMIP activities and things which could happen in the future. And I do think that AgMIP, I've also sent a poster in about this, I do think that AgMIP needs to think more about less about annual crops and more about perennial crops, because I think this is becoming a very important issue at the moment. And it will require a very different approach to modeling, I think. And I think it's a great challenge, actually. I think it's a very exciting thing to be thinking about. But I think that the general idea about, even if you're talking about landscape, is that you're really thinking about perennial systems much more than you're thinking about annual systems. And I think that's a great challenge for AgMIP to start doing some serious work on how we start making, or how they start making models which are based on perenniality and not just on annual, because I think that's going to be much more important in future. And it also introduces a whole load of other things like ecosystem services, of course, which is also very, very important as well. So I just wanted to thank you for letting me to make some comments about this. I wish I was with you in CIMMIT, but I'm an emeritus professor these days. I have no money anymore, so I can't travel so much.
But it's good to see you virtually, John. Anyway, I think the comment is also quite helpful with respect to, you made that link as well to the landscape level. That's the topic of the session here. The effects that different types of cropping systems actually have, and certainly not in Europe looking much into perennial crops yet. Coming up here and then, but they are not really finding their way yet.
No, but I don't. Sorry, Frank, but I mean, to get something from the European Research Council to talk about this kind of, I think it's a new area which is developing, and I think that, I mean, one of the things I have been doing recently is working with Derek Moot in Lincoln University on a new textbook, the physiology of crop yield, and that's become very important, clear to us that perennial crops, particularly Derek's work with lucerne and alfalfa, for example, is really, I'm not joking about this, is really saving farmers' lives in New Zealand to start moving into perennial crops from annual crops, because of the climate conditions and the fact that these perennial crops can tap water from deep in the soil profile. So I think this is really something that is going to be on the agenda for the future.
Yeah, we took that point also. Thank you, John. There are more colleagues. He was first, yeah.
So my name is Adam. I am from University of Weinheim in Germany. We have a model called Lucia, which is designed specifically for landscape simulation, especially explicit, detailed, process-based. We couple it with PC raster for modeling the lateral and horizontal flows of all processes. And we are using it to simulate crop livestock interactions. And we have an application, especially in the Borana area, for grazing priority, and different grazing areas to different farms. But we have coupled it with many models. But this is what we are working on the landscape, and we have applied again in another landscape in Vietnam. And currently we have a project from EU, the Galileo, which was used now to determine the landscape priority of different systems, agroforestry, the small ruminant and other something like that. So that's what we are working on. This model.
Frank, can I just make a comment about what John mentioned? Don't forget that trees are a perennial crop, and a very big issue, of course, is how much carbon they can sequester, and it's a really important part of modern landscapes and carbon markets. This is a really.
And you're not talking about agroforestry, you talk about plantations.
I make no distinction.
Also can be considered. Maybe alternative crop, alternative system, cropping system, rather than only conventional crops like rice, wheat, and maize. They are feeding the earth, they are feeding the world, but
With the university,
alternative crops. Yeah.
with the university in Copenhagen, with the university in Copenhagen have actually a combined food and energy system, which I started about 30 years ago. And that's really, that puts a focus on the interaction between annual crops and perennial crops like fast growing trees. I mean, this is the kind of, how do we make an agricultural system which is fossil fuel energy neutral? You can only do that if you do invest in perennial crops, and trees is a very good part of that, I think. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. Thanks, John. We have one more.
Yes.
Two more. Three more. Wow. Great stock taking here.
My name is Raniero Della Peuta. I work at the Europe Mediterranean Center for Climate Change, CMCC, in Italy. We have a couple of projects where we use log scale process-based models, crop models, on a regional scale. The first one is about coffee, so it relates with perennial crops and agroforestry. Because we use this model at regional scale, even at continental scale, trying to see the effects of climate change on yields, but also trying to assess the efficacy of adaptation measures, such as increased shading by the shade trees in an agroforestry setting. And this relates to the landscape scales in the sense that this approach can favor other kind of ecosystem services like biodiversity, trees, or provision of other foods like wood, etc. Also, climate change is probably going to shift production areas, or at least suitability areas for coffee, to high altitude areas. So pushing up the production with all the issues of sustainability in the sense of impacting forest areas and with high value in terms of biodiversity, etc. So I think this could be seen as landscape scale. I'm not really sure if it can be considered like this. And the other project is about maize and wheat in the Po Valley, the main agricultural area in Italy, and we are going to use DSAT and EPIC there. And the point is that we have to assess conservation agricultural measures as an adaptation to climate change. And this would also look at carbon in soil and irrigation requirements. So this would inform a whole landscape management in the sense of irrigation necessities, carbon sinking, etc.
You're also going into hydrology, to the hydrology cycles of them.
Yes. Okay. Good. Yes, this is the idea.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And then we have.
Let me go last because I have a different.
You have a different angle.
Yeah.
If we have, maybe we do you first and then Elaine.
Sure. Thanks. So I'm Kevin Carl at Columbia University. I'm part of the AgMIP coordinating unit. And I wanted to raise a couple of things. First, I'll start with my project and then maybe a couple framing comments. So we're working to examine an agricultural production system within a watershed. focusing on water quality as an output in addition to yield, et cetera. So the sort of multi-objective optimization, I think, is going to be very important for this group. We're talking about yield plus biodiversity plus ecosystem services plus water quality. I think that's maybe the niche a little bit for this group. And so I wanted to raise that. I don't know if there's other hydrological modelers in here, but if anybody wants to talk about agricultural production in watersheds, I think that's an emerging topic for watershed managers. I also just wanted to introduce this. I haven't heard people talk about nature-based solutions, but basically implementing. We've talked about them in detail, just hadn't used that term. So buffer strips or flower strips, riparian buffers, etc. I think that might be also an area for this group to have some focus on, is where to make those investments in nature-based solutions to achieve these multiple outcomes down the line.
Thanks a lot. You and then
My name is Marianela Fara. I'm a professor at LMU Munich. We're working mainly with AgMIP10. It's a gridded cosmic space model. And we'll have a number of projects. Maybe I just shortly name 2 or 3 of them. The first one, and that's why we are also the landscape area, is the interactions between agriculture and water systems. And with water systems, I mean water reservoirs, but also water availability, groundwater, surface water, and also snowdrops. We're also taking a look at the interactions with hydropower and how hydropower and agricultural production interact at a landscape level.
Agropower is agro-photovoltaic. So
Yeah, exactly. The second project is about data simulation. We're trying to simulate sentinel data into AgML for forecasting seasonally agricultural yields and seeing what the interactions of yields and water and biodiversity are. And with biodiversity, I come to the third part, where we are in a couple of projects taking a look at the interactions in land use change, mainly in the Bavarian region in Germany, and how extension or expansion of agriculture or reduction in agricultural area because of abandonment interact with water, with biodiversity, with the landscape configuration. So that's mainly what we're doing in the team.
Thanks a lot. Also quite comprehensive. And that's all with the GML model.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a couple of former projects that are still working with ProMed, also a similar model, but the new ones are all with AgML.
Thank you. Well,
So the last 2 comments actually zoomed in on what I wanted to comment on when you decide what your bounds are going to be around landscape. If the word optimization isn't playing a central role, it will be far less useful for decision makers. Right? So that's really key. And that would imply that all elements of the landscape are part of that optimization. Right? Where are we going to grow food? Where are we going to mitigate climate change? Where are we going to put the industrial zone? Where are we going to have agrivoltaics, et cetera? It's really key relative to each other. So it's not whatever we do in this group, if it's only about what happens in place, it's less useful policy makers. Then the second comment I wanted to make is related to that is many of you have talked about into the future, and I think that has to be there, right? So there is the spatial optimization, but there's also the temporal optimization that's going on. And then the last comment, which maybe is this group connected to some other, the economics group, but the value chain, right? So if it's going to solve, if it's going to lead to is it going to do that? And sometimes that means very degraded if the solution is restoration, it won't make any money. But if that's connected to a crop agricultural area, maybe quite distant, but strategically integrated, which is being done now in many large-scale restoration missions, then there's an opportunity for everybody to gain. and maybe reduce conflict, etc. So just wanted to keep those elements in mind. They were mentioned here and there, but I think that they should be part of the objective of the group, in my view, to make this more and more relevant to decision.
Thank you. That sort of brings me, did I forget someone?
Also, thank you. Still have time. My name is Felix Vogtmeier, and I'm currently working at the University of Leeds in the field of ecosystem services modeling. So what we are trying, basically we have two main goals. We are trying to see if in a very high data scarce environments of leases, limited data on many things, including environmental data, if we can use remote sensing or heavily relying on remote sensing data, if you can produce meaningful results in our cases, ecosystem services as well, that flood risk or water scarcity. Yeah, and the other goal is to do this in a very participatory approach. So we are having workshops with communities and really discuss the model to actually see if this is of any use to the local communities. It's indirectly related to agriculture because these main drivers at the moment are deforestation itself driven by agricultural expansion. So it's interesting to see that climate change is actually not the biggest driver of the services. There's really land use change. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So I forgot to say one thing. Our model is the explicit level that can be simulated. At the moment, we have 25 kilometers by 25 kilometers. Anything beyond that, we don't have that.
Okay. Now you see, take the notes. Okay. We are almost halfway through, even more than the time that we have. And we are meeting for the first time here. There are groups that have been meeting for 15 years. So this is the first time we meet. And it would be good to get a sense out of this exchange whether we see a need of meeting more regularly, exchanging more regularly. Do we have enough joint interest in this domain of landscape scale modeling that where we would see an added value of a regular exchange of the topics we are dealing with? And Bram made gave some characteristics, typical characteristics of that scale, almost a summary of what people have said, how it's a spatial scale that so we share at the larger spatial scale. It's the aspect of multiple objectives. It's not only looking at one variable or two, but it's multiple and always trying to understand the trade-offs, the synergies to optimize, being able to optimize that. It requires a comprehensive approach and not only one model perhaps, but maybe a suite of models or maybe other ways of integrating information. The AI can play a role, etc. Value chain may also be a common denominator. And you said at the end the participatory approach. We think it's also important in our institute, but therefore I bring it up, but it wasn't said by many others. Maybe it was implicit in several of your studies. So my question is, do we have enough shared interest in a regular exchange, and what would be maybe the most important things to be looked at, challenges or methodologically, maybe data related, that this group, if we see enough common interest, could look into first in order so that we create a win-win-win situation for participants. If we get a first sense out of this, that would be helpful in order to organize that further. Who wants to make those? John again. John. You're muted. Your mic is not on.
There it is. I'm back on again, I think.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, I think there are many interesting aspects to this. And I think really the thing that I try to think about is how a process is different at different scales. I mean, that's an interesting scientific question. I think, you know, how do the processes that we deal with in our current models, which are, you know, basically point-based models, how can those be translated into processes which occur at the landscape level? I think I think you can think about all the processes you might go through to get people together and do some work together. But I think you really have got to start with what are the important questions that you're going to try and address if you do get people together. And my point really, as I've just said, is that how do these processes that we've dealt with so long at individual crop levels, how do they possibly, do we have to reinvent a new series of processes which are particularly relevant at the landscape level? I think that's what I'm trying to say.
That's another dimension of the scientific. Are we having the tools, the knowledge in order to address that? A combination of models, maybe upscaling in order to simplify detailed process-based models for landscape scale applications. There are a number of methodological issues.
It's not methodological, because it's deeper than that. It's deeper than just methodological, well, because at the different scales you can maybe get non-linearities which come in which you don't see at the individual crop scales, which become completely determining the outcome at landscape scales, I think.
Yes, I think we mean the same, John. Maybe the term methodological was confusing you. It wasn't right, but I agree with you. I see that point.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Our point of view is kind of similar. Like what I wouldn't see any concrete common denominator like in our topics, but it's probably exactly this heterogeneity in the group that can make it interesting to start some activity where we map out these landscape conceptualizations, also those processes, and basically identify what can we model, where are the loose ends, and based on such an exercise that could ideally also yield something like a perspective paper, if someone has the capacity for such an activity, but basically having a meeting to start mapping out those systems and then basically ticking the boxes, what can we do, what can't we do.
Can I just give you, let's just think about something really, really basic here about radiation use efficiency. We can measure radiation use efficiency in crops, and we've done it for ages. But what does it mean to have radiation use efficiency, which is an important parameter in any kind of biological system we're dealing with? What does it mean to have radiation use efficiency on a landscape scale rather than just as a homogeneous crop scale? I mean, is it different?
Yeah.
Are different things involved?
Yeah, John, I think that's a specific item that one could look at, and that comes with the bigger question of how do people conceptualize the landscape and what type of tools do they use and approaches do they use? That's a proposal. I can see the value in that.
Is it linear?
John, we have other people in the room that.
Sorry.
Yeah. Who was you had a
I'm not sure whether it's a linking theme. Definitely data. It goes right across AgMIP. You need to have enough data. But as we've talked about the multi-objectives, a thing that I always struggle with is, particularly with modern models, you can output so much data, so many multifaceted data. How do you compare systems? And this is something I'm sort of currently in the middle of. How do you compare one system to another in terms of all these aspects? And how do you present that information to people? It's inevitably you have a value judgment at the end. I value birds more than I value water quality, or rare orchids are the most important thing. But some way I'm sort of hoping to get out of AgMIP maybe some way to work through that, some way to synthesize.
Well, what sometimes people do if they compare landscapes for different variables, ecosystem services, whatever you want to use here, biodiversity related indicators. They use these type of diagrams.
Yeah.
It's one way.
That's all.
It's just one way.
Yeah, it's a
Get a
good,
sense of, you know.
good visualization,
Yeah.
but still then the question is, what do I do with that? Yeah.
I mean, could that not be also falling under the umbrella of conceptualization? How do we approach? How do we conceptualize that? How do we, which methods, approaches we use, and how do we visualize the results? Those three items to get a more sort of qualified stock taking of what is seen. What is going
Different
on?
ideas
Yeah.
about how to do it.
Yeah.
Question maybe for you, seeing some of what you've done, which looks great. But so in the AgMIP context, thinking through how could we bring multiple models to bear to reduce uncertainty, carry a stronger message, to understand the models better, where do you think, or maybe this is for the room also, but where do you think a multi-model approach could really push the needle further? Like which of those variables that you're assessing maybe needs more of a multi-model approach to reduce uncertainties because uncertainties are so high, or there's more definition that needs to be done first?
Yeah, I'm not sure the multi-model approach in the context of what we're discussing here is easily reachable. We will have, I would expect if we do that exercise, we will have quite different ways of how people conceptualize landscapes. That depends on the perspective that they have and the questions that they want to address in the particular regions that are at stake. And there will be methodological issues, I guess, that are interesting for other groups to also be adopted, maybe refined. I can see that value. And there may be common challenges with respect to data and maybe sharing of model components, but the modeling solutions that people will come. I fantasy to
back again
than in that context.
It sounds like
that could come further if we have more insights and more understanding of how we do it. As yeah,
like comparing the conceptualization is the starting point.
I can see that very.
But I mean, what are our hypotheses going to be? What are our hypotheses going to be? You've got to start with the hypothesis.
No, I usually start with a question, John, and then you have a hypothesis.
Okay.
The question would be, what model approaches do we use conceptually? And a hypothesis will be they are all similar or they are different, and then you can have an argument why they are different, because the contextual situations are different, etc. And for that, I can really see a value in that. Also I mean, we do that as well in order to learn from each other what we're doing. Maybe sort of also eventually maybe to come to larger scale assessment by linking up different landscape activities. Cool.
Frank, we go back to GCTE. We go back to GCTE, Frank.
John, we have to keep a bit of a discipline here in terms of what people. There's another.
Yeah, my name is Ramona. I'm from CSRO based in Canberra. I'm actually modeling the legume-based cropping systems in Australia. It's more of a point-based approach using AgMIP. So related with the landscape modeling, I'm really concerned with how we can upgrade or upscale the capacity of AgMIP research in modeling landscape in landscape-based. I think we need to discuss that.
But I think there is a value by learning how there are groups here that was my sense that have taken one or two steps further already. They are using physiological based crop models, also in conjunction with other models, in order to address multiple variables objective in a landscape context. And that could be helpful maybe for you as well to see how they have done it in order to learn.
Yeah, and if I could just, I don't know if there's any GGCMI people here.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if you could speak, I mean, I think there's some people here who might benefit from knowing about the gridded problem approach a little bit.
Yes, that can be helpful as well.
Yeah, sure. I think this is also, like Leonard said, happening at different scales. Like we do it really in an isolated way globally, typically with one single monocrop in each pixel for 100 years. So it's basically, and you can call this like a simpler approach. So we run for each pixel at half degree resolution our models for each crop separately. And ex post, we assign it to cropland maps, for example, or we feed it into these integrated assessment or land use change models. But then our motivation to go down to this landscape scale is exactly to have this representation of actual cropping systems, like you have in multiple cropping systems with specific rotations, rather than having such a single crop. Or then also working with our biodiversity colleagues on these interactions. So in the GCMI community, we are building an infrastructure, a computational infrastructure that can here be helpful. But to get then again these landscape effects into it, we need to also reach out to other communities and build exactly those interfaces so that we can get those integrated effects, synergies, trade-offs, and feedbacks between different landscape components.
So you're trying to downscale further.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. And then upscale again if we have new knowledge. So for us, this is also part of the learning process. And if we have the data, then we can translate this new knowledge into even further upscaling, not from the point scale to the landscape scale, but then again from the landscape scale to a global scale.
Okay, yeah,
Just add on to briefing. For our GDCMI project, we found it's really model performance well in some high data region, maybe in United States, in China, or in European, but for the Africa and the South Asia, the model performance is not so well. Maybe the landscape modeling can provide us some data to help our global modeler to improve our results.
okay. So there's a good link to that community, to this group, also to perhaps some of the crop modeling groups. I can see that value. And maybe also to some of the other groups, I can see the links. And I take as an intermediate sort of summary that there would be a shared interest to learn better how people conceptualize their systems and how do they model it. Can we take that from this round? That's already, I think, a good intermediate result. And that's a suggestion to spend the remaining 20 minutes, 25 minutes on the crop losses, because that's the second part. And maybe we can have also a quick round of what people have done there. Some people said already we looked into crop losses also at the landscape level because we were interested in that. Maybe to get a feel of what type of losses people looked into. And I don't know, Diego, do you want to make a start, or you already said something? And then we would just take stock as well here.
Maybe I'll just mention briefly, so it's not necessary to present something. Just what you have seen this morning, this type of gridded disease modeling simulation. So we simulate in a gridded scale what is happening in terms of the plant development in a crop systems, but also in parallel a disease model also running at the same time. So we simulate we have an assumption as an initial inoculum that it's there, it's everywhere. So if the initial inoculum progress, if it has the conditions to progress until the infection of the plant, the host plant, so it progress towards the damage of different specific processes in the plant. So at the end we have like a decrease in yield. So we have this for climate change scenarios for nowadays where the disease is not there yet. So if what could happen if the disease gets to different regions, so on. So this is the kind of work that we have done in terms of disease losses. So I don't know if you can share what type of losses are you modeling, and also how this...
Maybe the how, maybe we wait a minute with the how, because that can take up quite some time. Maybe first understand if someone has looked into crop losses, what losses have you? So that was losses due to diseases. Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Vidur. I'm a PhD student in Germany at the University of Hamburg. And I look mostly at the effects of climate extreme events on crop yields. So I'm also in the GGCMI community, so I work with globally graded crop models and try to sort of assess how climate extremes lead to crop losses. But yeah, one of the issues is that extreme events tend to be quite local and on quite a small landscape scale. But I'm using global crop models, so there's some sort of disparity in the sorts of losses I can look at and the ones I want to look at. So I guess that's also like data or scale issue.
Yeah. Microclimate issues.
Yeah.
We go around. We can continue with.
I've looked into losses due to heat. Remember a sentence from a Minoli paper that the average African summer 2080 will be hotter than the extremes today. And I thought it was striking that maize crop losses in the region projected to be 10–20%. And I thought it was way too little. And I found out that most crop models do not have a direct heat damage function. That's a big blind spot many crop models have.
Yeah. So we have disease,
It's like towards the more semi-rich habitats, we lost some yields in the fields.
due to land use change.
Yeah.
And what do you mean?
For example, by replacing maybe some of the semi-natural habitats like flower strips on the fields border, this can take some errors, of course, for the yield. So this kind of yield losses is also considered or as an assumption of my model. But the problem is also that there's also feedbacks of the semi-natural habitats and the yield, but these kind of things cannot be captured and they're very difficult to consider.
And you?
So my name is Chen. I come from the health. My research interest is focused on the pasture loss, and the previous research points out about is 50% of yield loss can be attributed to the raw pest and disease, but there's no recent paper to do the real estimate about how much each part contribute to the yield loss. So that is what I'm interested in.
My name is John, and I'm also from South as a change. Yeah, so I mainly work on the excessive rainfall stresses on crops and mainly also water logging, but we also focus on other things, mulching and submergence and pest and disease will be linked with these water conditions. And now we are initiating one with exercise, which is now combining all these stressors that we have been improving for past few years. So it's like now multiple stressors things. And another project I'm supervising the PhD student is like we want to see the impact of this agroforestry, the multiple stressors in the agroforestry systems. Like they may change the light conditions, but also the water, soil water balance, and also other things, relative humidity and wind speeds. So, now really combining different stresses.
Thank you.
We're focusing on drought related.
Please go ahead.
Drought related crop losses, not only in terms of deficit in precipitation, but also in soil moisture anomalies.
Well, with our global crop model, we are basically also covering those stresses that have already been mentioned, but our model AgMIP was originally designed for soil degradation modeling. And this is something that we are also trying to implement, and that is quite challenging at the global scale. As mentioned, there is little data on rotations on specific crop management with soil cover outside the growing season. So if we would run the model with soil erosion for 100 years with a monocrop maize globally, the soil profile would be gone. So we can in principle do this, and we try to find ways to address this globally. at least to get an idea what's the importance. But that is like one of the challenges when you want to model soil degradation. You really need to have a very good knowledge what's really going on the ground.
Yeah. So that's quite a list now becoming yeah. Krishna?
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, I work for South India. I use DSAT model for modeling rice, groundnut, maize, sorghum crops for South India. But I understood that in almost many researchers are working on the same area, and it is not reaching farmers. So I shifted my focus to early warning systems and disseminating the climate forecast, long range forecast, medium range forecast to the farmers and helping them, especially during extreme events. Heavy floods are happening, heavy rainfall is happening, and they don't have any clue how to manage this or how to like prepone their harvest or postpone their harvest or the adaptation options, all those things. I'm working with the farmers and disseminating the information to them. And I am also working with farmers in the coastal areas for storm surge is a problem in South India. Storm surge as well as sea level rise is there, but that is maybe a future possibility. But storm surge and cyclones and coastal agriculture. I'm focusing and I've used ICT tools to disseminate the information for all kinds of forecast systems to the farmers. So I'm using ICTs basically. I wanted to have more impact, so I shifted my focus from models to, but still I'm working with modelers in the group and getting the information and putting it to the next.
Thank you.
Someone working on is it modeling?
Yeah. Actually, we are working mainly in 4 types of crop losses addressing. One is due to crop loss due to poor management practices.
Due to what?
Poor management practices, untimely planting, inappropriate fertilizer application, inappropriate irrigation, inappropriate variety, this kind of thing, or I would say management practices. And goal is to optimize those input or management practices and soil degradation. Actually, soil degradation, how the yield will be under different fertility conditions. This kind of soil degradation is also very challenging in dryland. Actually, we work in dryland, mainly in North Africa and West Asian countries. Number one is around that area. Second is, of course, in dryland, climate variability, rainfall variability, big challenge. The drought, I would say, drought area around that one. I give the example of Morocco yesterday also. In last 6 years, out of 6 years, 5-year countries getting less than 200 millimeter water in wheat season. Less than 200, how much yield they can get? This is getting very challenging actually. That's also the reason I sometimes agree that why not we go and simply forest crop than food crop? Why we don't change with the replace with other crops? Those things are coming strongly actually in drylands. So second, my area is around climate variability and third one is temperature, of course. Actually, when I work in South Asia, heat stress in wheat, terminal wheat. If they plant wheat after December 15, there is big terminal heat stress. Similarly, maize, there is barrenness in maize. Cold stress as well as heat stress, both is very much causing ill and we are working. And fourth, of course, is soil salinity. Effect of soil salinity. I'll be showing my presentation tomorrow also, day after tomorrow also. Huge effect of soil salinity, drought, temperature, rainfall variability, and management practices.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was surprised no one else said salinity, Krishna, but soil pH, acidity.
Yeah.
The other one.
And so high rainfall area acidity, of course, low rainfall salinity. Those both problematic soil that we are saying problem soils.
Yeah. Okay, so that's quite a long list of and quite different causes of yield loss. Any value on same question here as for the landscape discussion? Any value here on exchanging on losses a bit more rigorously? Or is it so different in terms of the losses that people look at that there is less gain and less type of exchange? What's your sense about that? Yeah.
I would definitely exclude losses due to wrong management because that's a counterfactual. Farmer doesn't know automatically what the best management case is every year. And you couldn't define this as a loss, but that's adaptation. That's only a different topic.
You can also turn the question around. Is there a value on looking into maybe the top 5, top 7 losses that people find most important?
Compliment on that one. I disagree on that one. Reason is I'll give you an example. I hope in Vietnam. Give me 1 2 minutes. I hope in Vietnam. I have seen only 5 or 6 East Asian countries. They are having good management practices recommended from the government. This morning there was very good discussion, science and policy. There is no. This is the only reason there is good communication in rice, at least with science and policy. And like in Vietnam, there is one M5R. That's 1:5 reduction, and every farmer needs to adopt that one. Otherwise, they will not get the subsidy. That's the reason Vietnamese rice is 7 ton, and they are exporting all their rice in Europe. All they are learning. Why other farmers are not getting that one is, you are right. This is management. We not need to put in loss, but considering our impact, people are not taking that this as a management practice. They are simply, yeah.
I think
That's we need to put that on here.
We understand your point.
Yeah.
Just quickly on this idea of hierarchy, I think is really science specific.
It is about I was just trying to understand how we go about, huh? So it's a long list.
Yeah, but I think it talks to this yield gap analysis.
Yes.
To understand what's the potential yield, what's the water limited, what's the actual yield, and then how did all these factors play.
That's the loss. That's the loss.
With respect to this group, is there enough shared interest?
I don't know whether, like, I heard that there was sort of biological losses, and then there was sort of, I heard a lot heat and drought and that sort of thing, which are often connected. So I wonder whether that's a grouping, because certainly biological can share and exchange ideas.
Yeah.
I wonder what the multiple stressors person would say about that.
That's also good.
I think maybe we can like better define what is the yield loss and versus we cannot reach the yield potential. I think this is maybe the common language we should think.
I see the link to the yield gap as a framework. I conceptualize that. I'm not 100% sure what the organizers of the session had in mind when they came up with crop losses. But I think it's quite good to have an inventarization of what people are all doing, and quite important. I'm not sure we get to a conclusion of how to continue with the crop losses. I see still hands. Maybe there's an idea.
Yeah.
We have 10
I'm
minutes.
just wondering, like all the existing models have the capability for doing the yield gap, those what are limited, potential, which are limited and actual, which will use as a benchmark to quantify the losses attributed to management practices. But what I see here may be how different models take into account about these traces, the routines. That's how I look at it. So for example, maybe how models represent salinity, acidity, or do they incorporate that or not? How the effect of waterlogging and other things were incorporated. So that's how I look at it, but I stand to be corrected. Sorry for that.
Yeah, maybe that could be a start. But we look into this, how models do that, and see what is not being done. No, that's not comprehensive. This is much longer. You had a hand in there, Mark.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, but I see kind of 2 ways of going forward here. The one way would be that way and seeing how comparing models and who is doing what and learning from each other. And I think that has a huge value. But the other way is recognizing that crop losses have not been very advanced compared with other areas. And so many models are doing one thing and another model is doing another thing, so we cannot compare. And so we go rather for compounding the losses. So putting them together and to try to analyze all together what it means as a sum of all of these drivers of losses in a sort of paper or project or whatever.
Well, I'm still.
Yeah, I just want to say that this kind of tact is really important, because if you come away with some things that everyone agrees we must do, then the whole thing moves forward. And that's what we need on the policy side. Right now, it's very disparate. It's very disparate. It's very difficult to draw a conclusion from a paper. So the group doesn't necessarily have to solve the big challenge up front, but if the fundamental things that you end up agreeing everyone should consider when they move forward, then everything moves forward much more in concert. It helps everybody down the road. That's a big step that this group could take, and I would definitely not drop crop losses. I would solve the problems that are making it hard to solve, to address it.
No, we're not dropping it. We just
Yeah,
try to
okay.
understand how to move ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are groups that look into, but dispersed, selected losses already. And that's your point. Yeah.
I think I just had my one good idea on this session.
You just had it on yourself.
One more time. It could bring this a bit together, because so far for crop losses, we've been mostly talking about yield losses. And if I think of talking to a policymaker or even a layman like my father, a family member, the models say 20% less maize yields. It doesn't tell them anything. It doesn't evoke any reaction. That doesn't motivate anyone to change their behavior. And we could or should move to production losses and economic impacts. And that's where the landscape scale modeling can really help, because we need area for that, actually, and land use decisions, what the farmer decides to plant where. So we can translate 2 tons per hectare less maize yield to 200 tons less maize overall, and then whatever economic impact that has. And if you hear to 20 million losses, dollars losses, that feels more useful, especially from a talking to policymakers perspective, than 20% less yields. And for that, landscape modeling and land use modeling really needs to provide input.
Yeah. So how do we go ahead now? We have 5 more minutes. I sensed that there is a shared interest in the landscape scale modeling to understand the different conceptual approaches and exchange on those, and see what we can learn from that and how we can move ahead from there. I also sense that there is a demand for not dropping the multiple losses idea. I can see that as well. We need to come to a point how do we organize ourselves around these issues. One question is, do we keep the losses within the discussion of the landscape scale modeling, or would it be better to address them separately? You made a link at the end with your intervention that there is, or you sort of pointed to a link. It could still be good maybe to have a subgroup that looks a bit more into the losses issues and tries to, based on what we've discussed and what is around, maybe put things together, come with a 2 or 3 page of how this aspect of the losses could be approached. Maybe within a landscape scale, but maybe not necessarily. That could be one proposal. And the question would be who would be interested in that, and who would be taking the lead? Anybody who would like to sign up for that? We're still here for 3 more days. You still have time to think about it, but if we come to a conclusion here, that would already be very helpful.
We also are passing a list of emails so we can keep in touch.
So anybody immediately want to take a role here? Okay. If you come to an insight after the meeting, just drop us a line. And then I have the question with respect to the landscape modeling. Who would like to be engaged into the next steps, prepare things, maybe organize the group a bit, structure the process a little? Who would like to engage there? And maybe also take a lead there. Oh, how are we going?
I can take some organizing capacity into landscape.
Landscape, okay, cool. Yeah, that's nice. Good.
It would be good to join some momentum.
Yeah, John, do you want to take a?
Well, no, I'm just going to say I'm going to be meeting up with Leonard Olson in Lund in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and he's got this big ARC grant about perenniality, and then that must involve landscape as well. He's a geographer. I mean, he's a geographer. He's not a crop physiologist. He's a geographer. So I you know, if I could raise the idea with him, I think I don't know what his response would be at all, but it might be worth just having I mean, he and I are going to meet up at some point, and you know, I could bring this across him, and I don't know what his relationship with AgMIP is at all, but yeah. Sorry, Frank. Yeah.
That would be good. I know Leonard. He may remember our exchange within Seamless, so that.
Yeah, of course. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, it was in there.
So I do tend to think maybe there are two separate subgroups for me, just given the breadth of.
I think for the moment it would be good if there would be a little subgroup on the losses.
Yes,
get things started.
I agree. And I know this list contains everybody. I'll email out the list, and maybe people can let me know which of the groups they want to be in. And then this magical leader of the crop loss subgroup will emerge over the workshop. Maybe the person who has the best idea.
Frank, it would be. Frank, could I just have an idea of what your thinking is?
That's a nice end of the session. Thanks very much for lively discussion. That's a very new issue also within AgMIP, and has been a great feedback. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Frank. Diego. Thank you.
Yeah, if we're gonna go into the lobby, there'll be people guiding you towards. Oh, thanks.
It was so